All right. Well, I am sitting here with Aleksandra Bazinska, who's been part of the Redbeard Online team for, almost 2 years now, or maybe not quite, maybe a year and a half. And really been a pleasure getting to know you, Aleksandra, over this time. Aleksandra is based in Tucson, Arizona, but is originally from Poland and does really powerful work online with a whole host, sort of a deep tool belt of modalities, many of them somatic modalities, like somatic experiencing, but also many others from a background that stretches back decades. So the goal here today is just to hear a little bit about Aleksandra's story, what led her into therapeutic work and embodiment work, and then the type of work she's doing these days with Redbeard Somatic Therapy. So, Aleksandra, thank you for taking time here today.
It's my pleasure.
Great. So, I always like to start with background. And we don't have the 10 hours we would need to hear your entire journey. But what do you think is important about your own background? What led you into even pursuing therapeutic work in the first place?
Mhm. I come from the country where World War II began. My parents, grandparents, and everybody I knew were very traumatized, frozen, in some ways unhappy or very stressed out.
Mm.
I also grew up during this deep socialistic years behind the Iron Curtain, where we are supposed to think black and white. There was nothing like freedom of expression really, or encouragement to think independently. We had to believe in certain ways, and also Catholic Church in Poland was very dominant. So there was a lot of unhappiness, depression, drinking going on, besides vibrant Polish culture, which is fabulous. But the underlying unhappiness and just being boxed in or caged in was going on. So without knowing it, I was most of my young years depressed and didn't know who I was, what I wanted. We were trained to think that the group or society was more important than individual. So it was the opposite of put the oxygen mask on yourself first. Actually, when I came to America years later, I was almost terrified. Like, how? What? You put oxygen mask on yourself first? No, you take care of everybody else first. So, very different background than in America. It took me many years to undo it.
Sure.
When I was in high school, I was introduced to a British healer who was coming once or twice a year, and he would touch people on their heads mostly for a few seconds, and people would heal. I spent 4 years volunteering at those events. I was reading the stories, and I was still touched by his generosity but by the power of human touch that it really impacted my life powerfully. And I unconsciously decided that that will be my career, helping people, maybe doing something with healing. I wasn't sure. So it took me a few years to figure it out. All of my neighbors' cousins were going to medical school. In the 80s, medical schools, the medicine wasn't that impressive. It was just taking pills and they were working or not. So my calling. I tried physical therapy school. I learned massage. I learned touch, some breath work and exercise. So that was fascinating, but it wasn't my thing. Then I proceeded to go to graduate school for clinical psychology. And again, initially it was more superficial, wasn't touching me deeply initially. But during the third year, when we started really doing deeper work, I was amazed by the magic of human connection. How much, by creating safety and being present and accepting another human, how much it was changing them, how much it was allowing their inner capacity or wisdom do whatever they needed to regroup and feel stronger and feel more resourced. So, and during graduate school, actually before graduate school, I became a yoga teacher. So I was teaching yoga classes when I was in grad school. I started studying Chinese medicine, acupuncture. So the deep body, mind, spirit approach
Mm-hmm.
and the mystery of sticking needles and helping people clarify their mind or settling.
Right, right.
So it was, like in a candy store of discovering possibilities in the world of how to help people, how to transform lives. Yeah, and that was very satisfying. In graduate school, also, I did several. It wasn't. Yes, we didn't have embodied approaches to psychotherapy yet.
Right.
Studying Gestalt, Jungian psychodynamic psychotherapies.
Sure.
I took several week-long trainings in Gestalt where I was introduced to actually body-centered exercises taught by actors from Grotowski School. So we would walk for half an hour in this trance dance through the fields in the winter, and then we would just fall face down on the ground and stay there. And or hug a tree, or continue running, and then with shoes closed, run through the creek.
Right.
Just to feel the aliveness of the body. So there were elements of embodiment, but with all the freeze that I developed growing up, it took way more for me than that to really feel my body. Fast forward, and when the Iron Curtain went down,
right.
I was traveling everywhere, different European countries, studying different forms of meditation. I went to India several times on yogic retreat, Buddhist retreats, Sufi retreats. Fast forward in 1995, I got a scholarship to an intensive created by process-oriented psychology, Arnold Mendel. That was another very fascinating experience where the principle of deep democracy, of recognizing that all kinds of groups of people of color, different social groups, need to contribute their voice to the wholeness of humanity. And the deep democracy on the outside was translating into the deep democracy within, meaning all parts of us need to be heard in order for us to be whole. So I didn't think it in the language of parts, but that was, I think, was my first exposure to working with parts.
Parts work, yeah.
Parts work, and appreciating that every part is important for us to feel harmonious, balanced, and whole.
I see.
Then my next big adventure was discovering Qinate Song, which was Chinese medicine-based body work. Dive deeply into internal organs, do different breathing practices, Taoist meditations, Qigong, and so forth. I remember when I was receiving my first treatment, I was in the room full of people receiving treatments who were just moaning, groaning, just saying, "Oh, what an amazing experience." Energy flowing from the belly to legs, and I felt nothing. I was so numb, I was so frozen. I mean, I did feel the physical touch, but none of the magic. Despite all the Qigong yoga, still on an embodied level, I was in deep freeze, and it took me years of patient work. I think Qinate Song, that the deep touch was awakening my body. That was only when I discovered somatic experiencing in
when was that for you?
2009, 2000.
Yeah.
And it was a slow process again. Initially, it was so hard to feel the sensations in the body, but with time, when I was feeling more and more and connecting to my fear, on my sadness, on my anger, that was scary. Anger was such a scary emotion. When I was more focused on the physiology, on the physical experience, riding waves of activation and then settling and feeling the aliveness, like years before running through the creek in the winter with shoes. So things started really changing, and it felt like I was more present to myself, to life, to people. So that was one of my first, therapeutic.
Something that really woke things up somatically for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I also had plenty of developmental trauma and lack of relational skills. So I was looking for another approach that would address that more. And shortly after completing somatic experiencing, I discovered sensory motor psychotherapy. And that was a huge training, about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
With
That's Pat Ogden's work?
Pat
Yeah.
Ogden, based
Yeah.
on autonomy created by Ron Kurtz. So, yes, so the equivalent of deeply connecting to sensations, deeply connecting to my child parts or inner parts, emotional parts, and the nuanced work of how to bring safety and acceptance on that level. So that was phenomenal. I was in love with that. And then I continued deepening with somatic experiencing touch. Touch was definitely something that I always loved. So I studied with Kathy Kane, the somatic practice, how to release trauma through touch, how to unwind adrenals, brainstem, and so forth. And then my other big significant training was studying the combination of Chinese medicine connected to polyvagal theory and somatic experiencing with Elaine Duncan, the Tao of trauma.
Yeah.
And a few other things along the way. So I studied neurolinguistic programming, which was super fun. So I think my biggest challenge was how to integrate those modalities.
Right.
Nobody was really teaching how to put them together. So that's, and then when I joined Redbeard, there was a need for people to work with internal family systems. Your clients were familiar with it. So I was regrouping from all the previous ways of working with parts. And I discovered I fell in love with the simplicity and directness of IFS, internal family systems. So yeah, that's really, I think that IFS really helped me gel or integrate many of my previous approaches.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that was somewhat similar for me too, that it sort of just brought things together in a framework that I could still use all those other tools, but that creates an organization that's very, very, very helpful for many, many people. What could you share? So, that's a huge list of, and many, like I said earlier, many years of training. What are sessions with you like these days? What kinds of clients are you working with? How are you using your work?
I work with a broad range of complaints and clients who are very different. But each session is custom crafted. I start always with developing safety, connection, building relationship with the client. Often the next step is assessing where their nervous system is, how well they regulate, how easily they get triggered, how quickly they recover from being triggered.
Some of the common, complaints, things like anxiety is probably common. What about, I know you've done some work around chronic illness. What are some other things that you think nervous system work does a good job at supporting?
So definitely anxiety, depression, chronic illness, addictions, which are stabilized at some point, because at the initial stages of addiction, people need a lot of support. But I've worked with people who are just starting addiction work, recovery from alcohol or drugs with me, or food addictions. I also work on the relational level and relationships. I've worked with many people who are survivors of narcissistic abuse or form of relational abuse.
Yeah.
I love developmental work. I love going to the roots of, what relationally.
Right. And what for you, when you're going to the roots of developmental, could it be at any age, early childhood, infant, pre and perinatal, that whole timeline?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes for the early trauma, even pre-verbal, I use virtual touch. And it's harder for the client to verbally describe what's happening. So through sensation, sometimes it's easier.
Right. Tell us just a little bit about virtual touch, because for some people that would be, they wouldn't understand how that works. Can you just explain how you, obviously you can't physically touch in a Zoom online setting, but there's virtual touch has become quite utilized, not only by you, but it's become a thing. How would you describe it for somebody who didn't know what it is or was skeptical about it?
We live in a quantum universe. Often, when we think about somebody, they sense that. When we intentionally direct our energy of our hand to the body part of the client, most people feel that and they're amazed. Some people will say, I can feel your hand on my back. Or they can tell me, sometimes we play a guessing game, they can tell me where I am sending my intention to each body part.
Mm.
And it's amazing how that little amount of energy sent from a distance allows the body, often gives what it needs to unblock or reorganize whatever was holding it down or whatever's missing. Virtual touch is great for adrenal fatigue. It's very nourishing. People feel often much more rejuvenated. Definitely is regulating and relaxing. Sometimes it can trigger things, of course. That's always, with every touch, whatever's in the body can come to surface. But generally, it's very settling.
Yeah. What have you learned about virtual work or Zoom work over the last 3 years? What's your feeling about that setting as a therapeutic container?
I love working on Zoom. I can feel my clients. I can feel their emotions. I can feel them energetically. Many people appreciate the fact that they don't have to drive, save time, work from the comfort of their home. It's different than in person, of course, but some people actually feel safer on Zoom than in person. I have clients from living on different continents, and it's such a gift to be able to.
Yeah, no, that's been my experience as well. Great. Well, anything else that you can think of to share that would be helpful for someone to know about your style or approach?
I adapt to whatever people need, and my work is very collaborative. I check what works. I like giving people, I like resourcing people by teaching them different practices that they can use between sessions. So I think that speeds up the process of healing.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I really appreciate taking time just to kind of hear the whole picture. And we're very happy to have you with us here at Redbeard.
It's wonderful to be part of your community.